Hello friends, welcome to another Magic Monday. Today we are looking at the Modern Horizons 3 Commander 6 in a deck called They Are the Trees. The unspoken sentence before that is, they're not in the trees, they are the trees. So it is a tree folk tribal deck. And this commander is interesting. 3 mana for a 2/4 with reach. Whenever 6 attacks mill 3 cards, you may put a land from among them into your hand. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. Retrace means you can cast a card from your graveyard by discarding a land in addition to paying its other costs. Basically, you get to cycle through your deck a lot faster and do stuff. Oh, that was kind of lame. Under the hood, 35 creatures, 18 non-creatures, average mana cost of 4. But we are running a little heavy on lands at 46. You could run this at 50 and take a few useless tree folk out. I wouldn't blame you. I considered it as well, but it is tree folk tribal, so I wanted to include as many as possible. Again, 35 creatures, 21 of which are tree folk, 3 shapeshifters, and 3 constructs that you usually choose tree folk. So that would be 27 tree folk in this deck out of the 35 creatures. 1 sorcery, no instants, 18 artifacts, 5 enchantments, and a planeswalker. Again, 46 lands. So I'm going to skip over most of the tree folk because they're whatever, right? Like Wandering Tree Folk, it's a tree folk. It's a 2/3 with vigilance. This one, it's a 1/1 that gets stronger when you have tokens enter the battlefield, but there's not really a lot of tokens, so whatever. They're just tree folk, okay? Favorite enemy for some removal, which is nice, and whenever a creature an opponent controls of the noted type dies, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Kind of cool. Battle Glyph lets us fight and add a 1/1 counter if the creature entered the battlefield this turn. Utopian Sprawl, just to add an extra green. Willowgeist is a tree folk, and this card is super broken with 6, because whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, put a 1/1 counter on Willowgeist. So that includes the land that you've milled and anything that you retrace. Very cool. Mana here, mana here. This one we already talked about. Mana Rock. Reprint of Emerald Medallion from Tempest. So anyway, I have a couple of Sapphire Medallions in paper from Tempest, but I might have one other medallion, but I think I've got 2 Sapphires and that's it. But anyway, I just couldn't not include the medallion now that it was reprinted. Just a cool card. Metallic Mimic to get those 1/1 counters on tree folk. If you've seen a tribal deck before, it probably has this card in it. Mana Rock here, Mana Rock here. This guy turns a forest into a green tree folk creature. Just fits the theme. Growing Rights to add a bunch of green, also to help us find creatures, and because it seems appropriate for tree folk. Growing Rights, of course. Realm Walker, Shapeshifter, you choose tree folk, and you can cast tree folk from the top of your library. Scurry Oak's a tree folk that'll make a squirrel token, so it actually will trigger this other guy, this mentor, but I mean, that's it. Spawning Pod lets us sacrifice a low-level tree folk to bring up a slightly more expensive tree folk. Because why not? Automaton, it's another tribal standard. Cloud Key, choose creature because there's a lot of them. And they're expensive. Same thing here, choose tree folk, they get +1/1. Crucible Worlds lets us play lands from our graveyard. So after we send one to the graveyard as part of the retrace cost, we can cast it anyway. There are a couple of cards in here that let us play lands from our graveyard. Faceless Agent lets us search or seek a tree folk, not search, because it's random. Herald's Horn makes tree folk cheaper. This makes tree folk bigger. This is a tree folk, and it makes an elf. Oh boy. Whenever you draw a card, it gets +2/2 until end of turn. Whatever. Conduit of Worlds lets us play lands from our graveyard. Dormant Grove creates a 3/6 vigilant tree folk that gives other creatures vigilance as well, which is kind of nice. Gnarled Professor, 5/4 trample for 4 mana. Just by itself is pretty good. Goreclaw will make these things cheaper. The Magna Goth Sentry is just a common tree folk that you can absolutely take out of this deck and probably make it better, but it's a tree folk. Roaming Throne, you choose tree folk, and they trigger twice, which includes 6's ability, which is cool. This guy tempts you, this one, whatever. Play lands from your graveyard. I said I wasn't going to go over all the tree folk, so I'm skipping ahead here. Silverback Elder, because it's a stupid broken card. That is nice for control. Unnatural Growth, really appropriate for tree folk. Wrenn and 7 lets us, for -3, create a tree folk. And also, search for, with the +1, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put land cards into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. And then if you've got your commander out, they have retrace, so you just discard one of those land cards to cast from your graveyard. Very cool. Here's a legendary tree folk. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may return it to the battlefield face down under its owner's control. It's a forest. That's it. Just a forest. I thought about that as the commander, but didn't do it for me. Vanquisher's Banner makes our tree folk bigger. This guy, whatever. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it gets +XX until end of turn. What's the number of cards in your graveyard? Whatever. Here's another legendary tree folk. Quick Beam, the Upstart Ent. Whenever this or another tree folk enters the battlefield enters the battlefield under your control, up to 2 target creatures get +2/2 and gain trample until end of turn. That's kind of cool. Another big tree. Another big tree. Another big tree. And Fangorn. This was my other real consideration for a commander, but 7 mana for a 4/10 is just crazy, even as in a mono green deck. So tree folk have vigilance. Whenever you attack with 1 or more tree folk, add twice that many green. You don't lose unspent green mana as steps and phases end. That's pretty cool. Helps a lot with paying for the cost of stuff. 7/7 Trampling Tree. 7/7 Trampling Tree, Great Henge, literally a tree. This thing, kind of stupid, but if you pay the full 10 mana, it is an 8/8 tree folk with haste and base power, it is an 8/8 tree folk, and you untap target land you control, which also becomes a tree with haste, and it's also an 8/8. So that's cool. And then, Boseiju, Who Endures, 42 forests, this one that lets us seek stuff, this one that lets us discover stuff, and Nykthos, because it's a mono green deck. That's the deck, friends. I had a lot of fun doing something a little outside of the box. I haven't encountered a tree folk tribal deck in all of my Magic Arena playing, so I thought it might be something interesting to explore, especially with this new commander. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. If you do, you know what to do. It's YouTube. You just give it that little thumbs up. I know this series doesn't do a lot of views, but if anybody encounters this and looks through here and wants to leave me a comment, please do so. As always, be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other, and let's get to some games.